Welcome to Generation Jones, Too Young to Be Old. I'm your host, Wendi Cooper, and this is where we have conversations with remarkable people over 50 who have shaped our world. I do hope you enjoy the show. I think we've got a great show on our hands, everyone. If you've ever thought about doing a podcast, if you've ever thought about reinventing yourself after 50 and wondered how to do it, or if you've ever even thought about how you're going to share your expertise and wisdom in today's world, well, I think that's really what podcasting is all about. So that's why I've invited 58-year-old Rob Greenlee, the VP of Podcast Relations at Voxnest Spreaker. You know, Rob's a really well-known evangelist of the podcasting industry, and he was inducted into the Academy of Podcasters Hall of Fame in 2017. His role at Voxnest, Rob is responsible for managing relationships with more than 25,000 podcast producers. They entrust the company's Spreaker platform for their podcast creation, distribution, management, measurement, and monetization. Obviously, it's a great platform because it's just got a bundle of everything you need. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Rob Greenlee to Generation Jones.
It's great to be here, Wendi. It's my honor to join you. This is a fantastic topic that you have for your podcast. So I'm really looking forward to it.
It's that I'm glad you are, because it's so funny. I was just on Facebook while I was waiting for it to be 5 o'clock and to get you on the line. And a friend of mine who is my age, he posted something about, what's all this stuff about aging all over the place? Everywhere I look, there's something about aging, and I thought, that was kind of interesting because it is everywhere. It is everywhere. It's like, is it one of those things, Rob, where you all of a sudden, because you've become aware of a topic, you're seeing it everywhere? Or is it because it's just a real problem?
Well, I think aging is part of everyone's life. It's just that I think at various stages in your life, it becomes more important. I think as you get older, it becomes more important. So which only affects a certain percentage of the population out there, more and more.
Well, and what's interesting is that not all of us get old, right? Some of us don't even have a chance to get old.
There you go. That's true. Yes.
So first, I want to tell our listeners that if you hear little pitter pats, that is my skylight, and I'm in Los Angeles, and it's raining like crazy. And the other thing that you might hear is a 383 taking off in the background, because I'm literally 8 minutes from Los Angeles International Airport. But you shouldn't hear any of that. But I did want to do that disclaimer. So you're 58, Rob. And yes. You are working at Spreaker, right? Can you just give me a little bit of a background on what Spreaker is, and talk more about your background, because we have a lot in common. And one of the wonderful things about having you on the show is that we get to talk about a lot of different subjects that do kind of circle back around possibly to being over 55, you're 58, I'm 63, but I have a background in internet radio, live radio. This is literally my first actually produced podcast, and you have an immense background in that. So let's talk a little bit about your background before we really jump into some of the great questions I have for you.
Okay. Well, I can just quickly share what Spreaker is. It's actually owned by a company called Voxnest, which recently happened here over the last year. So that's its parent company. And what Voxnest is basically a consolidated platform between a couple of different separate companies that merged together that were doing similar things. One was called Blog Talk Radio, and the other one was Spreaker. So we combined these two companies together to create a much larger company but also had a lot of other types of capabilities. And what's a little bit unique about Spreaker in the podcasting space is that we support live audio. So people that can come into that platform can produce live shows as well as the on-demand stuff, which typically, if you're a podcast hosting platform, you mainly cater to just the on-demand part of the audio experience. So this is one platform that kind of bridges that divide. And if you look back over the years that online audio has been around, live audio's had a very important place in its history, as well as you think about live radio. And so you can see a lot of kind of the synergies in those worlds. And I came from more of a kind of a live radio kind of background. I started doing a radio show on a radio station back in 1999. And over time, I kind of took that out of the radio station and started doing it in my bedroom in my house. And this was like in 2001, 2000. Versus doing it in the radio station. And then I would just bring CDs down to the radio station with a pre-produced program. So, yeah, go ahead.
So I got into, I think it was probably 2008 or 2009. I didn't, it was like everything I do in my life is like accidental. I'm an accidental entrepreneur. I was an accidental, radio host. And I find, and let me back up a little bit. Podcasting is like, I make a joke now. Everybody and their dog has a podcast. It seems like, right? If you're at the grocery store, you tell someone you have a podcast, they more than likely will turn around and say, "So do I." But which is awesome, which is totally awesome. But back in the day when I started on LA Talk Radio. 1 hour live show, like what you're talking about, right? Mm-hmm. It was a live show done in a studio. And then I went over to UBN, which was a live video internet show, which then those would then be transferred over audio wise or video onto YouTube, because on a YouTube channel or whatever. But the live process is interesting. I love that because I came from live television, right? I came from being on HSN and QVC, and those are live, and you have got to react, and there's no backups, there's no retakes, there's no editing. It's just live, and I love that platform. So what Spreaker is doing is awesome, because I just think it's very different than a produced podcast, which is really what I'm doing now.
Yeah. I mean, it is. It's the complete spectrum of audio production. I mean, and more we're seeing in the podcasting world that people are getting into fictional. Really, most podcasting up over the last couple of years has been primarily reality based. Really, the only difference in the content, really up to kind of Hollywood getting involved in podcasting was how long the stories were. Yeah. So because I mean, just like what we're doing right now, we're basically doing kind of like a short storytelling podcast experience. So we tell kind of short snippets of stories where you look at like a serial, or you look at some of these more reality-based kind of serial kind of dramas almost. Those are long stories, right, that have different chapters, different episodes, and it kind of is a linear experience. And podcasting tends to be a very, each episode is kind of like a standalone thing, typically, where we tell short stories. So this is where kind of podcasting is kind of being re-energized right now, is that we're getting involved now, which has been, if you go back and you think about the history of radio was big into kind of fictional storytelling, long-form storytelling. You just look at the War of the Worlds, and what kind of an impact that storytelling audio drama had on the world, and you can kind of see where podcasting can kind of excel, which would be expanding into those type of areas. But podcasting, you're right. I mean, podcasting has had a strong presence in those that are creators and that like to create content and like to, talk and like to express themselves and have a passion towards something and try and build community around it. And I think that's kind of why we're talking is can podcasting can be used to build those type of things for yourself as you get a little older. So
yeah. When I have this thing that where if I invite someone to be on the show, or someone asks me, they would love to be a guest on the show, I always love to have a conversation with them first. Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's rare that I won't have a conversation with someone, and they might not like me. I might not like them. It's you have to have this synergy basically, and things in common to talk about. And when I was talking to you, we talked for quite some time. And I learned more about your background, because you know all about marketing, which is my background, and advertising, which is my background also. So there was a lot of parallels, and I really like that, because we can talk a little bit deeper and more intelligently on certain subjects. Yeah. What I'd love to ask you, besides the key question, which is what we're going to talk about. So what we're going to talk about, ladies and gentlemen, is that Rob and I really want to talk about whether, when you get over 50 or 55, 60, 65, even 70, and you still are looking to fulfill your passion, find your purpose, but yet you're looking to reinvent yourself, is podcasting a great option for that? So we'll talk about that in a minute. But first, what is your take on podcasting as far as the future and the growth? Because there's, like you said, there's serial podcasts, which can be really well produced, very well produced stories, right, with lots of sound design. And, there was one that's been around forever, 99%. Do you know that one? 99% invisible or something?
Right. Exactly. Yep.
And that was a first one.
Roman Mars is the host of that one. Yeah.
Yes. But there's those type, and then there's podcasts that are short, solo, 3, 15, 5, 10 minutes. And then there's interview podcasts such as this one. What do you see as being the best way to go, if there is one? And what do you see of the future of podcasting? Is this just something that's going to get so oversaturated that it might implode?
Well, as I really think about it, I mean, it's a complicated question, because I kind of look at it from a historical perspective as well, and that's what makes it even more complicated to kind of decipher what's happening. But the safest thing to say is that all the above is happening in the podcasting space, and it's been going on for a really long time. And what we're seeing right now is kind of the expansion of the fictional side, which I was talking about earlier. But if you go back and you look at the history of this medium, it's been around indie producers primarily that have gotten behind a microphone with, based on a passion, just like what we've been talking about here, and building community around their topic. It can be very granular. It can be something as niche as, pool cleaning. I mean, I talked to a guy once, like a couple of years ago, he was going to create a podcast about how to clean your pool. So, I mean, they can be at that kind of granular level, all the way up to, a long form kind of storytelling experience. Podcasts can be whatever you want them to be. I think a common reference to describe them is it's like a blank canvas. There are some general kind of guidelines to doing this stuff and doing it well, keeping in mind what the listener is kind of would like good audio quality and kind of value-driven content, and having some value in there that's beyond just the information, having value as far as some level of kind of comedy or humor or kind of banter that's conversational and fun to listen to. So there's various elements of this that come into play that really open the door to really what you want to do. And I think that's the key. One of the things too is that you can either go kind of broad or you can go narrow. And I think when I say that, I'm referring more to topics. It sometimes can be hard to get really narrow and keep coming up with content. But that's usually going to hit a mark. It's kind of like keyword targeting with Google. If you've ever done any kind of online marketing for your business or your company or whatever, you typically have to find keywords that are easy for people to find in the search engines, right? So it can be related to whatever you're doing. And there's some analogy to that to podcasting, because oftentimes that's how you're discovered, or that's how you're found, is based on a keyword search. So if you pick a topic that has, a very strong keyword base of people going to that term, you're typically going to drive a little bit more potential audience to your program. And it also depends on the influence that you have too in your personal brand, and how much of a community that you've built up to the point of launching a podcast. So what we see happen a lot is that celebrities will launch a podcast and they're able to have an advantage kicking it off, because they already have a built-in community. Or if you don't have a strong community, it can be a little more challenging to build community around your program, because you're just getting started.
I think it's probably, I've been in, my background is launching products into the marketplace, right? Helping companies launch their products through direct to consumer. And you're so right. One of our rules is always don't be niche, because your audience isn't big enough.
Right.
Or you'll spend too much money or time trying to find your audience, right? Yeah. The broader the product, the broader the use of the product, the better. My past shows have always been about marketing, and I would always say, well, everybody's a product and everybody needs marketing to succeed. That was always my tagline, because it's true.
Yeah, it is.
Even a podcast does. And I think for me, podcasting is so, not in producing it or having one, but being a consumer of podcasting. Mm-hmm. I think it's so wonderful because you can do it anywhere. You can listen to podcasts anywhere. The idea of being able to just stick some earbuds in and listen to something new or something different wherever you are. You can be listening to in the grocery store when you're shopping. I mean, in order for us to really leverage that voice effect, right? It's this is what I love about it. Now, I also want to say that it's interesting because in the podcast world, a lot of people will they don't get that. They don't get that people aren't like tuning in on Tuesday. They're like tuning in whenever they want. And they're listening to episode 1 maybe in 6 months from when you posted it on iTunes, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's a lot of things to think about, like people say, well, I want to do a free giveaway. What does everybody think about doing a giveaway on your podcast? Well, you better be ready to give that thing away forever. You know what I mean?
That's true. That's true. I mean, it is a strength of the medium, but it's also a weakness too. The fact that people can listen to it anytime is, you would think, would be a strength, but it also is one episode amongst many episodes out there that people have choice to consume. So that's where the marketing comes in, is that you have to drive attention to what that current episode is. And that's why a lot of podcasters firmly believe that you need to be regular with your episode publishing. It needs to be like once a week. Once you start getting beyond once a week, into longer durations, a period of time, you typically start to lose audience, because people will find something else to listen to, right? And people build it into their schedules, and people just want to have regular content from you if they've made that connection. And it is a very dedicated connection that they have to you. They've made a conscious choice that they're going to download your episode, or they're going to subscribe to your show in some podcast listening app. It's very much a personal connection that you're making with people that listen to your program. And oftentimes people get worried that I'm not growing my show fast enough, or I don't have a big enough audience, because people get used to hearing about shows having millions of listeners. But what you have to really think about when you think about doing a podcast is that these are very personal connections that you're making with people, and you need to treat them like that. You're speaking to one person when you do a podcast.
That's right.
They have an earbud in their ear. It doesn't get any more personal than that. And you're with them while they're out maybe riding their bike, or they're at the gym, or they're mowing the lawn. Who knows what they're doing? They're driving in the car in traffic and they're frustrated, and you're that calming voice that's making that connection with them. So it's a very powerful place to be a podcaster.
And you mentioned earlier about SEO and all of that, and
Right.
and it's so very true. But also, what is something that maybe is a good takeaway from this show is that rarely, and if you're listening to this show and you're a podcast avid listener, you will agree with me that rarely do you write down an email address to send your podcaster an email. It doesn't happen that often. It's never happened to me, actually. I did a whole show when I was at UBN about, okay, we're going to give away a $250 wine safari for Malibu Family Wines. The first person who sends an email, I was just testing the audience. The first person who sends an email, you win. And that kind of stuff, just unless you are a celebrity or you're Mark Maron or whomever, I don't know, those kind of tactics just don't work in the podcast world.
Yeah. I mean, what's really interesting, though, is that once you start getting into the live part, and this is to kind of take us away a little bit from the podcasting side, is that we have shows on our platform that do very well on the live side. They have people that come and listen at a certain time of the week, every week, and they've built huge communities. People comment in the comment threads. So it's the power of combining those two things together, which is what I've seen happen. And that's the show that I do on the Spreaker platform. It's a live show as well. And it builds a loyal base of people that come in and contribute. But it is the whole 80-20 rule, right? Where about 20% of your audience is going to be active in like maybe sending you emails and giving you feedback and things. But 80% of your audience, it's the whole floating iceberg effect, right? You're only going to see just the very top of the iceberg, but your audience is underwater. You don't see them because you don't hear from them. So, but if you build a big show, they're there, no question about it. But some of them will give you feedback, but not all of them.
Well, I know that my my live radio shows, they always had great stats, and it's a little bit different now with this produced podcast and getting, it's a completely different animal. Okay, so let's talk about. My question to you really was, okay, so everybody that's getting older wants to is looking at reinventing themselves, right? So it's very difficult, let's say, to find a job. I'm 63. If I wanted to even go out there and find a job, which I'm qualified to find one, but I'm probably not going to be hired. And even if I was hired, what kind of future do I really have entering a company at 63 years old with that particular company? It's going to be very limited. Right? There's really no big growth potential. And even going in an executive position, which it more than likely would be, there's still no real big growth potential there, right? You're always going to be on the edge of fearing that you're going to be laid off, or you work with a lot of young people.
Yeah, I do. I mean, if I think about my career, I am considered one of the elders in the podcasting space. So, which is kind of funny. It's not something that happened overnight. It's something that happened over many years, and I certainly don't think of myself like that when I'm functioning and active in the podcasting space. I do a lot of events. I man our booth, so I'm very, very out there and very, very public. As being the representative, really, or the face of this platform, and I just don't see myself as being an older person, but I realize the reality is there that at some point I'm going to reach 60 plus, and I'm going to have gray hair, and it's going to be hard to kind of blend in, with the younger people. So that's.
Yeah, but your wisdom and your knowledge and your expertise is invaluable to obviously, they understand that.
Right.
Right.
And that's what I'm counting on is being able to remain relevant in this space and being open to learning and being open to adapting and helping others to be successful, irregardless of age. I mean, I talk to podcasters that are, in their 50s and 60s all the time, and I talk to podcasters that are in their 20s all the time. So everybody has kind of similar challenges that they have, and sometimes having a long-standing experience in a lot of these areas is helpful to all levels and all age groups. Yeah.
I really love that live format. I'm sitting here and I'm actually Rob can't see me because my video thing isn't working, but I'm looking at Rob and all I'm thinking about is, boy, I'd love that live format. That live format was just something that I just really loved.
And no editing. That's the other part of it too, that you have to, I really included. I mean, you can do editing, but editing is a very time-consuming thing too.
That's right.
I mean, if you can do it live, you're done. You're moving on to the next thing, and it gets published, and you can do something else with your life. Now, a lot of podcasters spend a lot of hours doing post-production and post-editing with their podcasts, and it causes a lot of people to burn out. It causes a lot of people to do what they call pod fade, which is where you get into producing a show and you start running out of energy to keep it going, and live can be one of those things that can keep you energized. Both of the shows that I do every week are both live shows.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful format. I come from the television background, so TV commercials. So I would always sit with my editor. I'm very good at dialogue editing. I'm very good at I would always be the testimonial interviews were kind of my thing, but I would always tell a testimonial as I'm interviewing them on camera. I would say to them, I'm only going to use probably a maximum of 1 minute of this 30-minute interview. You have to understand that. Because
that's painful. That's painful.
It is painful, but it is the magic of being able to edit together a story told by other people, right? So I have that experience for many years. And so when I first started to do this podcast, I just kind of went into that zone. Like I had this hour with this rock and roll band, and I sent my show notes, my edit notes to my editor, and he called me and goes, you know what? I haven't been a dialogue editor for a long time because you're really good at it, Wendi. You really know how to move this dialogue around to tell the story. And then I realized that, okay, stop it. Stop taking this from the end of the show and putting it at the top, because I really love to tell that story, but I like to be able to create that story. And that was a big edit job. Beautiful show. It's actually the Heaven and Earth Classic Rock. I think they're the episode 2. You would never know I edited the crap out of that thing because it's done so well. But boy, I never wanted to do that again. I just didn't want to do it again.
Yeah, it's a lot of work moving stuff around like that. Yeah.
Yes, it is. So what advice would you have for people getting into podcasting, whether you're old or you're young? Because look, you have to have the right equipment.
Yeah.
You have to understand some technology, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I really had to dig in and learn because I set up my home studio. I decided not to go to Hollywood and do the studio thing, every week, although it was kind of cool for my guests. I'm just going to do it from home. Mm-hmm. So if anybody is thinking about doing a podcast, which I think it's a wonderful way, by the way, everyone who is over 50, if you want to share your wisdom, show your expertise, and build a personal brand, I actually think it's a pretty good thing to do. But, Rob, you might think differently.
Well, I think you have to look at things like this more holistically, I think. And one of the things that I think we're coming into a time in the podcasting space where it becomes more and more relevant is you can't just think, I'm just going to do a podcast and I'm not going to, I'm just going to produce a show and I'm going to publish that every week and people are just going to come and listen to it. Right. And it's all going to be kumbaya and everything is going to work out. But the reality is you have to think of it almost like you're starting a business. So where you have to have marketing, you got to have promotion, you got to have real world contact with your listeners. You got to get out there and get known and maybe even do other media as well. Write a book, publish, be a speaker at events. I think you have to think things more holistically. If you can get into other media like radio and television, I think it'll help you with your overall podcasting audience growth and development, because that's one of the big issues right now as we've reached kind of this level of 635,000 podcasts globally in the Apple ecosystem. Now that it's more and more challenging to get found. And as we see social media and other, media platforms kind of grow and proliferate and occupy people's time, we have to be able to be in multiple places and to be found in our genre and in our topic area. So that's what I would advise at this point. You can't just do a show and publish it and then do something else with your life. You have to really make it something that you're really seriously connected with and are doing all the things that you need to do from a marketing perspective and a promotions perspective to be found and to be heard and to build connections with audience members, as well as if you're doing an interview show like this, it can help you build networks of contacts. Especially as you get older, I think it becomes even more important for you to elevate your presence in any of the industry that you're in and be thought of as a thought leader and being thought of as a leader in the industry that you're focused on, I think can be real beneficial to you as well as far as keeping your career intact.
Maybe it almost boils down to, and I used to tell guests this, that if you're on my show or I have a podcast or I have a radio show, to me, that's really a marketing tool for my personal brand.
Right.
So let's say, and I love to public speak. I was always a public speaker for many, many years, and I loved it. I can speak better to 1,000 people than I can to one person standing in front of me. Mm-hmm. And there's no greater joy for me than to be up on a stage and adding value to an audience. But mm-hmm. you have to have a marketing tool to send out. Like you can have a one sheet, you can have all of that stuff. But look, if you have a podcast and people can you can send a link to your podcast and people hear what you have to say. They hear how you sound. They hear, how you emote and how you actually converse with other people or that you're interested or you're really not interested. You just want to do a podcast on, whatever. But it's really, marketing at the end of the day, marketing is everything, everyone. It is. And mm-hmm. like you're saying, I see people who will say, well, do I have to have a website if I have a podcast? I think that's the silliest question I've ever heard.
Yeah. Why would you not, right?
Right. Yeah. Not only just for the legality of if you want to collect an email address, number one, that's where you're going to do it. And number two, do you guys realize that a lot of people don't realize that the listeners on iTunes, the listeners on Stitcher, the listeners on Spotify, the listeners on Spreaker, the listeners wherever they might be, they don't belong to you. They belong to the platform that they're listening to you on. You're not getting that information, correct?
Yeah, well, that is oftentimes true. I know when you're hosting on like a platform like Spreaker, there's data that comes in from all these listening platforms. But yeah, you're right. I mean, you typically don't get much information from the listening platforms. You're right.
That's right. Yeah. It's kind of like, I have a toilet stool company and I sell that on Amazon, but I've sold 300,000 of those things, but not one of those customers is mine. I am not allowed to contact them, so that's a drawback. Yeah. That's a drawback. So that's why you really do have to have your own website where mm-hmm. people can opt in with an email. And now you can build an email list.
Yeah. Right. And you can stay in contact with them and offer value to them outside of your podcast. And that's powerful. It's just another medium that you can use to grow and develop deeper relationships with your audience. And those relationships over time will become very valuable to you as you try and build a business around your podcast. Now, oftentimes a lot of people don't care about building a business around their podcast. They don't want to make money from their podcast. They just want to build their presence in whatever group that they want to become an influencer in, that maybe help them with their job career, maybe get them their next job, hold on to the one that they have, But then there's others that want to make money from their show, and that's becoming more and more important in the podcasting space as well. Around sponsorship and advertising is becoming a big thing in the podcasting space right now.
Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
Can you fill people in and fill me in? I always had a sponsor in the past, but sponsorships, what do they really look like? Okay, people can be very influential, and of course, the sponsors are going to come flocking to all of the celebrities that have their podcasts, right? But how do you get a sponsor? And how difficult is it to get a sponsor? We all know it's probably pretty darn difficult. And the bigger question is, how do you keep a sponsor?
Well, yeah, those are all complicated questions that have a spectrum to them. And there's kind of two levels. There's host endorsed advertising, which is when the host of the show would actually read or do a host endorsement for a product or a service in the show. And then there's more traditional advertising, which would be a little bit more like a radio ad, right? Pre-produced that then you just put into your program. So, and that's where we are today with podcast advertising, is that's the spectrum. More recently, there's been what's called technology that's come into the medium called dynamic ad insertion, which is basically taking any kind of audio message and dynamically inserting it into the audio as it's being delivered to the listener. So we're adding more and more radio-like automation to the advertising platforms, and that's what Spreaker supports. Spreaker supports dynamic ad insertion of more, I'm going to say, pre-produced advertisements into the show that you can just sign up for, and we take care of all that. And then there's the other end of the spectrum where, like a brand, like a Geico or a Casper bed would come in and buy an ad, a host endorsed ad in your podcast that you would read as a host, and you would get paid based on how big your audience is. So all this is based on what they call CPM, which is a cost or a payment per 1,000 listeners.
Right.
And that ranges in CPMs or payments per 1,000 listeners ranges anywhere from like $20 to $30 for the host endorsed ads, all the way down to like $2 to $3 to $4 or $5 for the dynamic pre-produced ads that are inserted into shows. So scale is very important to building revenue if that's what your goals are in creating more of a business around your podcast.
So the sponsors are really just looking for ears as opposed to eyeballs. I mean,
they're looking to get a return on their investment around acquiring customers. So that's the bottom line to all this stuff too. And if they don't get that return on their investment, then they won't renew with you. So if you can keep the customers flowing and keep getting and driving them new customers for their product or their service, then they'll keep renewing with you. My co-host for the show that I do called the New Media Show has had the same advertiser for 13 years, and it's GoDaddy. So it is possible to have a long-term sponsorship. He's an example of that for his podcast. But then there's others that will just come in and buy, let's say, maybe a 6-week campaign or something like that, and then they'll move on to the next show. So,
yeah, I see that a lot. So I listen to, there's a couple of podcasts that I've been a loyal listener for many, many years, right? And and I always notice, because I'm in advertising, I do take note when all of a sudden the last week's sponsor isn't there anymore.
Right. Where did they go? Right.
Or the host read goes on for so long,
right?
That you want to kill yourself. There's always a fine line, everyone, with the length of that host read, right?
Yeah. Right.
And also you have to make sure that that host is going to be able to read. Because at that point, there's a natural flow to it. Like Howard Stern was always great at doing host reads, and because he made it seem so natural.
Well, that's the key, is that a host read really isn't a read. It's actually said from experience and the and the heart, there can be like bullet points that you can establish, the things that you want to make sure that you cover. But most good host reads are fairly ad lib, which means that they're more content than they are ad.
And they really do use the product. So from a legal point of view, you can't have what implied endorsement basically means that, that host actually has to use that product. So they are able to speak from experience, or they're and I think that's the best kind. That's really the best kind.
Yeah, well, in the early days of podcasting, a lot of hosts that took on advertising wouldn't always give the advertiser a positive review in their host read either all the time. It would be a real experience-based communication, and some advertisers didn't necessarily like that. But that's kind of where this started. Podcasting at its roots is not a commercial medium. It's and very early in the days of the medium, it was not something that was cool to have in your show, is to have an ad. So this kind of pushback back in that time around products that wanted to run advertising in podcasts, and then the host would feel the obligation to give a real review, not just one that had lots of flowers and positive words to describe the product. So and sometimes that didn't work out that well, as you might imagine.
Well, all I know is that back in 1993, we were launching an infomercial, and we didn't have the money to do it on TV, and so we sent Howard Stern. This is when he was still on, was it KRLA, or he was on the rock station here in LA. It was a long time ago. And so we sent him a product. He used it. He actually liked it. We didn't pay him. He talked about it. And do you know that launched a frickin' 1,000 ships? That was like gold. And it literally, our phone started to ring. It was like, oh my God, people were calling me. What do we do? What do we do? What do we do?
So it can go the other way as well, right? People, these hosts can just come across a product that they happen to talk about on their show, even though they don't have them as a paid sponsor.
Yes, we became a paid sponsor.
Right.
We did. We became a paid sponsor because, look, we had the test. We had the test that we knew it was already going to work.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So that was kind of awesome. So what kind of advice do you really give to, I don't care how old somebody is, but to somebody really starting out, other than, find your target market, talk about something that is relevant or interesting, have a dynamic, maybe I'm listing it already, have a dynamic personality,
right?
Don't be afraid of the microphone, those kind of, like, there's these, I see so many people. I think I met you because we were both on Podcast Movement's Facebook page, the Facebook group.
Yep.
And I can't tell you, I really do try to chime in and give some advice, like marketing advice at least, right? But I do see so many kind of like, I want to tear my hair out almost. It's like, really? Why are you even doing a podcast if you're asking that question?
Right. Yeah, I think the big thing you have to think about is just, what are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? I think just at the very beginning, that's what you have to get clear in your mind. And then topics tend to be important from a theme or a brand that that you're trying to develop, and it's just planning ahead a little bit is really helpful in this. I think a lot of shows get started without a lot of forethought around what they're trying to accomplish, what their topics are, and they can burn out of things to talk about. Maybe they don't have the knowledge foundation that they need to be able to sustain a show, because a podcast is a marathon run. It's not a sprint.
That's right.
I know that there's a lot of newer shows that are taking this season approach, where they'll produce, kind of like television has had for many years. But I don't believe that that's a long-term success model for podcasting. It's a marathon run of content. So you need to be able to pick a topic that you can go deep enough on that will sustain you week after week after week, and it won't become an onerous effort to come up with topics to talk about on your show, and to also create that dialogue with your audience that can drive topics from your audience as well. That's what I've done over many years, is just try and get feedback from the audience, whether it be phone calls, sending in audio comments, to just sending emails or comments on a website, and just use those as a basis for future topics in your show. Those are what your audience wants. So, coming up with a topic that you can sustain over the long run, that you have passion for, and that you care about, really genuinely care about sharing, and it needs to be a passion project for you to sustain this effort, because it takes a lot of work, as you know.
Yes,
Wendi, it takes a lot of work to produce these shows every week.
Yeah, it does. It takes more work than people think it does, and it also takes a lot of work to be able to have synergy with your guests, because all of your guests, if you have a guest-driven show, right? Yeah. They're all going to be different personalities, different topics, and my show, the genesis of my show is just because I'm 63 years old, and I struggled with what's my next show going to be, because I really wanted to get back on the air after 2 years. And I just kept hearing it. I was disturbed about my age, but, age, wisdom. And then I didn't even really realize, Rob, that there was this thing going on out there about ageism and all of the problems that people are getting older. And sure, about the financial difficulties and all of that stuff. We all get it. We didn't save for retirement. We get it. But there's just a deeper thing that is resonating with people that are getting older. So talking about all of this on my show is really wonderful. But at the same time, I just don't want to talk about that. I want to share my wisdom. And my wisdom is in like talking to people like you, who we have these commonalities that we can actually have a conversation about without going, wow, I'm getting old.
Stop whining, right?
Yeah.
Nothing you can do about it.
That's right. It's like, I don't want people to listen to the show and think it's always going to be the sad story of this. But, here's some value. If you're thinking about doing a podcast, hey, this is a great show to listen to. And because I think everybody should be looking to what is your expertise? What is your wisdom you want to share? What do you have that's unique that you can offer the world? Do your research, see if anybody else is talking about it. And that's what's the genius about podcasting, is it's really just sharing your voice with the world, Yeah.
And most people like to talk about themselves and talk about their interests. So it's also a factor too here, is that there are some basic skills that you need to have too in order to do this stuff, like basic things like how to use a microphone and this technology element that you're talking about. What is a podcast? How does a podcast get published? What are those basic principles that
How do you do your artwork? How do you do your artwork?
What kind of artwork makes the most sense and works? And I think going and looking at examples of artwork that's in like the top 200 list of Apple podcasts is a great place to start. Those shows are, because they're prominent, are doing some things right. So I would just listen to some successful shows that you think are gathering audience, and learn from them. You don't have to copy them, but make it unique, what you bring to podcasting. But there's a lot of things that can be learned from those that have succeeded, in the past and in the present, that you can apply to your program going forward. Some basic skills. It's kind of like playing any sports. I spent many years being a basketball player, and there's basic skills that you need to have to be able to succeed.
Yeah.
And with podcasting, it's the same thing. You need to have practice. You need to know how to do basic skills in this medium. And there's plenty of resources out there to get those skills. There's podcasts about podcasting out there that you can learn how to be a good podcaster if you just tune in and listen. Yeah. And that's how simple it is.
Yeah. At the end of the day, there's so many. YouTube is a great place for reference, and but you do need to know how to load things up to your platforms. You need to know what an RSS feed is. You need to know the right microphone. You need to know how to use deflectors. You need to know what a pop filter is.
Right.
There's a lot to learn if you're not accustomed to being in that environment. But nevertheless, you can learn it because, it's really readily available. But that doesn't mean, just because you build it, they will come.
That's right.
I just have to be honest with everyone. Just because you build it does not mean they're going to come and listen.
Yeah, I mean, you have to earn your audience, which means that you have to be relevant and you have to get out there and be found. You have to be discoverable.
So, but you are at Rob at Voxnest. That is VOXNEST.com.
Right, correct. Yes. And then also Rob at Spreaker.com too. So you can find me over there too.
Well, that's a lot easier, Rob.
Yes. Just Rob at anything and you can find me.
Well, you've been wonderful and you're so full of information, and I'm so happy that you joined me on the show today.
Well, thank you so much, Wendi, for having me on. It's fantastic.
That's a wrap for another great episode of Generation Jones, Too Young to Be Old. I'm your host, Wendi Cooper, and I hope you tune in next week for another great episode of Conversations with Remarkable People Over 50. You can find us at generationjonespodcast.com, and you can email me at wendy@generationjonespodcast.com. We'll see you next week, and thanks for listening.